What do you do when the people who are supposed to love you the most become the ones you're most afraid of? I used to believe that family was non-negotiable. That blood meant loyalty no matter what. That if things got bad enough, the people who raised you would still somehow choose you. I don't believe any of that anymore. And it took the worst night of my life to unlearn it. It started small, the way these things always do. I told my mother I wanted to move out for college. That's it. That was the whole crime. Not a rebellion, not a betrayal, just a teenager wanting the same independence every teenager wants. She didn't hear it that way. She heard abandonment. She started crying so hard she could barely breathe, screaming that I didn't love her, that after everything she'd done for me, I was just going to walk away. My sister heard the screaming from another room and came to investigate. When my mother told her what was happening, my sister didn't try to calm anyone down. She didn't ask me a single question. She just pulled out her phone right there in front of me and started typing. A few seconds later, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I won't repeat what she wrote. I've thought about whether to, because some part of me wants people to understand exactly how ugly it was, but I've decided the words themselves don't matter as much as what they were built to do. It was engineered, sentence by sentence, to find the most tender, most breakable part of me and press down as hard as possible. It referenced things I had confided in her in private, dark thoughts I'd only ever admitted to her because she was my sister, and I trusted her. She used all of it as ammunition. She told me nobody would ever love me. She told me I was worthless. She brought up a sexual assault I had survived and twisted it into a punchline. And she closed it all by telling me I already knew what I should do about how I'd been feeling, so why not just do it? I read it standing in the hallway, and I felt something in my chest cave in. I started crying, the kind of crying where you can't get a full breath. My mother saw my face and started laughing. Not a nervous laugh, not an uncomfortable one. Genuine, delighted laughter, like she'd just watched something funny happen to a stranger. Hilarious, she said to my sister, then turned to me. You're going nowhere, she told me, and walked off like she'd settled something. I wanted to leave that exact second. My legs wanted to move toward the door on their own, but I had nowhere to go, no plan, no bag packed, nothing but the clothes I was standing in, and a growing certainty that staying in that house was going to be the thing that eventually killed me. One way or another, my sister wasn't finished either. She came back a few minutes later with a look on her face I can only describe as hungry. She stood close enough that I could feel her breath when she spoke, needling me quietly, asking if I was hurt, apologizing with total insincerity for not seeing me, when she flicked the back of my head hard enough to make me stumble. She told me I should disappear, that I'd be doing everyone a favor. Then she walked away laughing like she'd just won something. That night I locked myself in my room and sat on the edge of my bed for a long time just staring at nothing. My head was pounding where she'd hit it, but that pain was nothing compared to the pressure sitting on my chest. I knew two things with total clarity. I could not spend another year in that house, and I could not just walk out the front door because they would stop me. I needed a plan, something airtight, so I did something that felt strange and almost clinical in the moment. I opened my messages and started taking screenshots, not just of that night, but of years of things my sister had sent me. Threats, insults, cruelty I'd tried to forget because remembering it hurt too much to carry around daily. I saved everything into a hidden folder and backed it up to an old email account nobody else knew about. It felt like I was building a legal case against my own sister, which is a genuinely strange thing to do to someone who shares your last name. But I told myself I needed proof, if not for anyone else, then for myself. For the moments down the road when I might start to wonder if I'd overreacted. Then I packed. Quietly, carefully listening for footsteps the entire time. A few changes of clothes rolled tight to save space. My laptop and charger. A couple of books I couldn't bear to leave behind. And tucked deep at the bottom of my backpack, under everything else. The roughly $300 I'd managed to save from a part-time job over the past year. It wasn't much. It was also everything I had. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my ears. Every small sound in the house made me freeze. And then, right as I was zipping the bag shut, I heard footsteps in the hallway, close and getting closer. I'd forgotten to lock the door. The handle rattled and my mother's voice came through sharp. "Open the door!" I froze for a second, then made myself get up and unlock it. She pushed it open and her eyes went straight to the bag on my bed. I watched the realization land on her face in real time. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she demanded. I forced my voice steady. "Just packing some stuff? For college. I wanted to be ready early. Don't lie to me." She stepped closer, close enough that I could see every line of anger on her face. "You think you're leaving? After everything I've done for you? You're just going to walk out?" I swallowed hard and did the only thing I could think to do. I lied straight to her face. "I'm not trying to leave right now," I said, forcing something like a smile. "I'm just getting things together. I'm not going anywhere." She studied me for what felt like an eternity, searching my face for the lie she knew was there. I made myself hold her stare, made myself keep my expression soft and defeated. because I understood instinctively that if she saw even a flicker of resolve in my eyes, she would never let me out of her sight again. Finally, she stepped back, her mouth curling into something between a smirk and a sneer. "That's right," she said. "You're not going anywhere. You belong here with your family. Don't you forget that." "I won't forget," I said quietly. And I meant it, just not in the way she thought. She left, slamming the door behind her, and I sat down on the floor and just shook for a while. My hands wouldn't stop trembling as I finished packing. But underneath the fear, something else was solidifying. A decision. I wasn't going to let her win. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I was getting out of that house, even if it meant sneaking out in the dead of night with nothing but a backpack and $300. There was one thread of hope I hadn't mentioned to anyone in the house. An acquaintance of mine, someone whose family had crossed paths with my mother before and knew exactly what she was like, had quietly offered to take me in if I could make it to them and kept my location secret. That was the plan. That was where I was running to. The first update I ever wrote after that night was short and shaking, almost as much as my hands were. I was on my way to a domestic violence shelter, terrified out of my mind. The family who'd offered to take me in had backed out at the last minute. They lived far away, but the thought of my mother finding out where I was staying scared them enough that they didn't want to risk it. I was furious at first. It felt like abandonment layered on top of abandonment. But I understood, even through the anger, that fear like that doesn't always make room for logic. Getting out the door that final night hadn't been clean either. My mother caught me on my way out and threw a vase at me. She screamed things at me I won't repeat, threats aimed at making sure I understood exactly what leaving would cost me. I left anyway, without showering, without grabbing half the things I'd planned to, just moving because stopping wasn't an option anymore. The next update came from an emergency room. The shelter was covering the cost of medication I needed, and I remember being more embarrassed about how disheveled I looked than about the actual reason I was there, which says a lot about where my head was at during that period. The shelter itself, though, surprised me. It was calm. Nobody yelled. Nobody threw anything. I didn't have to brace myself before walking into a room. The only shadow hanging over it was the 30-day clock, 30 days to rebuild an entire life from almost nothing. I had a single lead, a job interview at a movie theater, and I decided the only strategy that made sense was total honesty. I was staying in a shelter, and I needed this job badly. The final update I ever wrote came nearly 3 years after the first one, and it started with me trying to explain how strange it felt to reread my own desperation after so much time had passed. I'd genuinely forgotten how bad it had been. Rereading those old words felt like reaching back and hugging a version of myself who had no idea what was coming. That shelter turned out to be nothing like what I'd feared walking in. It was newly built, clean, well-staffed, nothing like the overcrowded facilities the staff told me they'd worked in before. There were 7 other women staying there alongside me, and I was easily the youngest of the group. They folded me into their routines almost immediately, teaching me how to do my makeup before interviews, showing me how to season food properly, just generally treating me like someone worth investing time in, which was a feeling I genuinely hadn't experienced before. We took turns cooking according to house rules, and developed something close to a found family in a matter of weeks. The staff talked with us not just about logistics, but about life, about what came next, about who we wanted to become once we were out from under whatever had brought us there. A local church group came by one week with quilts they'd hand-sewn for each of us. I still have mine. I still wrap myself in it on hard nights, and I wash it more carefully than almost anything else I own. We also had therapy, both individual and group sessions, and I can say honestly that it changed the trajectory of everything that came after. I know not every shelter experience looks like mine did, and I don't want to pretend the system is uniformly this functional. But I want anyone reading this who's in a bad situation to know that leaving is allowed, even when the harm is coming from family, even when nobody outside your house would ever believe you. Family abuse is still abuse. It still counts. Eventually, I moved into a rented room with a roommate who worked as a truck driver and was almost never home. I wasn't fully comfortable sharing space with an older man I barely knew, but my options were limited and this one was livable. Since our schedules almost never overlapped, we started leaving each other short notes instead of talking in person. Little updates, reminders, the occasional joke. I still have some of those notes tucked away somewhere. It's a strange thing to feel nostalgic about, but I do. I did eventually go back to school, though not to the university I'd originally enrolled in. I needed distance physically and mentally from anything my family could trace. I applied somewhere new, wrote my admissions essay about everything I'd survived and rebuilt, and got in. My sister once told me I was never going to be anything. I think somewhere underneath all that cruelty, she probably knew that wasn't true, and said it anyway because it was the only weapon she had left. I graduated this year. It took longer than I originally planned. A few years longer than the version of me who first walked out that door expected. But I've stopped measuring my life against a timeline that assumed none of this would happen to me. The delay wasn't wasted time. It was survival time, and it mattered just as much. I'm engaged now, to a man whose entire family has folded me into their lives the way you'd expect a family to. They call me theirs without hesitation. I'm especially close with his mother, closer than I ever imagined I could be with anyone in that role. A few days ago, I had food poisoning for the first time in my life, and without me asking for anything. My fiancé got up at 2 in the morning to drive out and get me electrolyte drinks, then offered to make me soup once I could keep something down. Growing up, being sick meant being told to go back to bed and handle it myself. Having someone show up for me like that, unprompted, still catches me off guard sometimes. He has 6 siblings, and somewhere along the way, they became the siblings I never actually had growing up. The kind who show up, who don't need a reason to check in, who make room for you without making you feel like a burden. Somewhere in the years since I left, I learned how to value myself in ways nobody had ever modeled for me. Nobody made me feel important as a kid, so I started doing it myself. A therapist once suggested I buy myself flowers regularly, just as a small, deliberate act of care, and it turned out to genuinely make a difference in how I move through hard weeks. Nobody protected my rest when I was sick as a kid, so now I protect it fiercely as an adult, sometimes disappearing from my phone for a full day just to let myself recover without interruption. Small things, but they're mine, and I built them on purpose. When I wrote that last update 3 years ago, I was still crying while I typed it. I genuinely didn't believe 30 days in a shelter could turn into anything resembling a real life. I was depressed, exhausted, and certain the story ended in more of the same. It didn't. It became the beginning of the only life I actually wanted.